July 23, 1942, Hickam, Hawaii. Military Log Entry 47B, Unit Panther Recon, Alpha Division. The night air was thick with the smell of diesel and burning tar, and the distant rumble of artillery rolls across the horizon like some relentless, metallic storm. Technical Sergeant Joe Sarnowski crouched in the belly of the B-7 Flying Fortress, the beam of his flashlight slicing through the darkness as he traced the intricate network of fuel lines and pumps with the obsessive focus of a man whose life depended not just on protocol, but on instinct. He knew every bolt, every gasket, every valve like the back of his calloused hands, and yet tonight, something had shifted. 2 days ago, he had watched his closest friend, Private Henning, torn apart by a sudden ambush just outside the defensive perimeter, a scene that no amount of training or discipline could erase. Henning's death was an accident of war, yet it seared into Joe a raw, uncontainable rage, a determination that the next mistake, the next lapse of mechanical oversight, would not take another life. And so he acted outside regulations, bypassing strict fuel protocols, injecting a controversial additive he had scavenged from abandoned supply crates, an experimental, almost forbidden chemical compound designed to push the Panzer IV's engine beyond its manufacturer's official limits. The additive was volatile, unpredictable, potentially catastrophic if miscalculated, yet in Joe's mind, it was the only way to prevent further tragedy. In the stillness of the aircraft hangar, the world reduced to the hiss of pressurized lines and the smell of burnt oil, Joe meticulously calibrated the ratios, adjusting for temperature, viscosity, and engine compression, his hands trembling not from fear, but from the emotional gravity of his mission. Outside, the armored columns waited, idling their engines, unaware of the gamble that would redefine the reach of German armored divisions across the Pacific theater. Every technician and quartermaster had warned against improvisation. Protocol was sacrosanct, the margin for error negligible, but Joe's grief demanded action. As he worked, he imagined Henning's face, the way his eyes had widened in shock before the last breath left him, and it became a quiet, ferocious mantra: no more. When the first Panzer rolled out with Joe's modification, it carried not only soldiers and ammunition, but a secret fuel efficiency far beyond official specifications. What had been rated for 150 kilometers, without refueling now stretched over 450 kilometers, turning tactical operations that had once required intricate supply lines into audacious deep strikes across enemy territory. Commanders would later notice the discrepancy in operational logs, fuel consumption far below predictions, but no one could trace the anomaly to a single human act in the dark hours of a Hawaiian dawn. Reports filtered in. Outposts were being bypassed, enemy positions struck with uncanny timing, units advancing deeper into hostile terrain with a fluidity that had been thought impossible for armored warfare. Yet within Joe's mind, the technical triumph was inseparable from the emotional weight of battlefield loss. Each kilometer gained was measured against the lives saved, each engine roar a tribute to Henning's memory, each risk a silent defiance of the regulations that had felt insufficient in the face of human grief. And then came the night of the Kiska Peninsula advance, when a column of modified Panzers, led by a commander who would never know the origin of his extended range, punched through the snowbound choke points, bypassing entrenched positions, collapsing a section of enemy fortifications before anyone could mount an organized defense. The battlefield reports, in their cold, bureaucratic detail, spoke of superior engineering, of logistical excellence, of tactical genius. But they never spoke of Joe Sarnowski crouched in the belly of a B-7, his hands blackened, his face streaked with sweat and oil, driven not by doctrine but by grief, by loyalty, by the desperate human need to prevent another friend from dying under his watch. And yet the additive was as much a weapon as it was a gamble. If miscalculated, it could cause engine seizure, ignite fires, or render the Panzers immobile mid-advance. Night after night, Joe performed the calculations, the adjustments, the dangerous improvisations, guided by memory, intuition, and the relentless pulse of a heart shaped by loss. The logs would later credit mechanical ingenuity, sometimes even label it as unverified experimental testing. But the truth was never documented. A lone mechanic, bending the rules in the shadow of death, had transformed the operational reach of an entire armored division. And as dawn broke over the jagged ridges of the Aleutians, casting long shadows over snow and steel, the hum of engines carried a story no official report would capture. The story of desperation turned into tactical revolution, of grief channeled into mechanical brilliance, of one man's quiet rebellion against the inevitability of loss, and the unintended, historic consequences of a fuel hack that would alter the course of battles that no one yet knew were about to unfold. By midday, the effects of Joe's illegal fuel modification became impossible to ignore. Reconnaissance reports indicated Panzer columns arriving at objectives well ahead of schedule, supply depots overrun with precision, and infantry coordination disrupted in ways that suggested an almost preternatural understanding of the battlefield. Commanders at the front speculated wildly, some whispering about ghost mechanics or experimental fuel rumors that circulated among the Panzer crews, but no one could trace the source of this unprecedented operational efficiency. Inside the armored hulls, crews noticed subtle differences. Engines ran smoother, vibrations dampened in ways they could not articulate, and fuel gauges dipped far slower than expected. Mechanics assigned to maintenance logs were puzzled, technicians scratching their heads over consumption figures that defied known physics. Meanwhile, Joe, hundreds of kilometers away, worked with meticulous precision, monitoring the production of the additive, refining its chemical balance to account for temperature, altitude, and load variations. Each batch he prepared carried an invisible signature, a hidden code of experimentation born from intuition and desperation. Outside, the battlefield was a chaotic theater of snow, steel, and fire. Enemy artillery pounded the advancing Panzers, and yet vehicles continued to surge forward, sometimes at speeds deemed unsustainable. The added fuel efficiency allowed commanders to enact flanking maneuvers that had been impossible just weeks earlier, catching defenders off guard in frozen passes and encircling positions thought impregnable. Joe's work was both art and science. He calculated viscosity adjustments based on barometric readings, modulated compression ratios to prevent pre-ignition, and sometimes performed on-the-fly tweaks when supply inconsistencies threatened to sabotage the delicate chemical balance. Every misstep carried potential catastrophe. A misjudged ratio could cause engine explosions, fires within the tank hull, or complete immobilization in hostile territory. Yet he proceeded, driven by memory of Henning and the constant fear that inaction meant more death. In one particularly tense incident, a column of 5 Panzers approached a narrow mountain pass where enemy anti-tank guns lay hidden. Joe's additive had increased engine output by nearly 40%, allowing them to accelerate through the choke point before artillery could fully target them. The detonation of enemy shells against rock walls sent showers of debris into the air, yet the Panzers pressed on unscathed, engines humming at optimal performance. Crews, unaware of the chemical intervention, attributed their survival to luck, courage, or skill. But it was, in truth, the quiet genius of a mechanic who had defied protocol. Meanwhile, logistical chains struggled to comprehend the shift. Fuel depots reported shortages that made no sense. Vehicles were consuming far less than accounted for, stretching operations in ways previously impossible. Rear echelon officers began auditing records, attempting to trace discrepancies, but the additive's clandestine production and deployment left no paper trail. Joe worked alone, often late into the night, poring over manuals, notes, and chemical samples, cross-referencing engine tolerances against field conditions, all while maintaining the facade of routine maintenance. The emotional burden weighed on him. Every successful operation was haunted by the specter of those lost, every gain tempered by the understanding that the additive was a fragile miracle, capable of catastrophic failure if mishandled. In the Aleutian Theater, German commanders began exploiting the newfound operational range, launching deep raids that disrupted enemy communication lines, captured strategic passes, and forced retreats that would have been impossible under normal fuel consumption. Reports filtered back to Berlin, highlighting unprecedented efficiency, but all official narratives credited engineering ingenuity or unit discipline, leaving Joe's role invisible, hidden in the shadows of war. Back in the hangar at Hickam Field, he continued refining his process, testing new mixtures under extreme conditions, taking note of variations in winter-grade diesel, altitude fluctuations, and extended load capacities. Night after night, he calibrated, measured, and sometimes discarded entire batches when calculations were off by a fraction, understanding that one miscalculation could immobilize a column of tanks in enemy territory, costing lives. Yet for all the technical precision, it was emotion that drove him, the raw, unyielding memory of friends lost in ambushes, the knowledge that every extra kilometer could be the difference between life and death. And so, beneath the glare of hangar lights, the rhythmic hum of engines became a soundtrack to obsession, a testament to human ingenuity tempered by grief. Historians would later document the logistical anomaly, noting a temporary surge in Panzer range and attributing it to experimental modifications. Yet none would capture the human calculus behind the phenomenon, the delicate blend of fear, anger, memory, and technical brilliance that had allowed a single mechanic to bend the rules of physics, engineering, and war itself. And as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting long shadows across frostbitten terrain, Joe Sarnowski prepared another batch of the additive, hands blackened, eyes bloodshot, heart heavy yet resolute, knowing that each drop of chemical miracle he produced carried the weight of human loss, tactical genius, and the precarious gamble of bending war's rules for the sake of life. The winter winds swept across the Aleutian ridges, carrying with them the scent of snow, gunpowder, and diesel. Joe Sarnowski stood back from the latest batch of tanks rolling out, watching their engines hum with a vitality that had once been impossible. Each Panzer now carried further than any standard calculation had ever allowed, their extended reach a silent monument to a mechanic's grief-driven ingenuity. Commanders in the field, oblivious to the clandestine human hand behind these operational miracles, marveled at the tactical flexibility, the precision strikes, the ability to reach deep into enemy territory without pausing for fuel. In letters that would later become part of declassified archives, officers spoke of unprecedented efficiency, engineering breakthroughs, even ghostly timing in maneuvers, yet none captured the human story of loss, desperation, and silent heroism that had birthed these results. Joe's mind, however, was never on glory or accolades. Each kilometer gained was measured against the memory of Henning, each operational success a quiet tribute to those who had died unnecessarily because bureaucracy and protocol could not bend to human tragedy. The additive was both miracle and curse. A single miscalculation could have immolated the tanks, ended lives, or derailed entire operations. Yet it had not failed once. With each convoy that returned intact, Joe felt both relief and exhaustion, the weight of unseen responsibility pressing heavier with every victory. Soldiers spoke of the smooth engines, the extended journeys, the way fuel seemed almost inexhaustible, but none knew the precise reason why. And perhaps that was for the best. By the end of the Aleutian campaign, the cumulative effect of Joe's intervention was undeniable. Strategic outposts were bypassed, supply lines disrupted, and enemy morale fractured by the seemingly impossible mobility of German armor. The so-called fuel anomaly had shifted the tempo of warfare in the Pacific, proving that ingenuity and grief could bend the rigid frameworks of logistics and doctrine. Yet Joe remained a shadow in the official records. The forgotten mechanic would return to the hangars, quietly refining his work for the next column of Panzers, never seeking recognition, never asking for thanks. The war would continue, full of chaos, death, and heroism, both celebrated and unseen. But in the story of the Aleutians, of extended armored operations and tactical audacity, his mark was indelible. As the final columns rolled back into base, engines still vibrating with the untapped potential of the additive, Joe finally allowed himself a moment to exhale. The hangar was quiet now, the hum of mechanical life replaced by the muffled sounds of men eating, talking, sleeping, living. In that silence, he felt the weight of his grief lighten slightly, replaced by the knowledge that in some small, dangerous way, he had prevented further tragedy. The records might never mention him, the commanders might never understand, and history might never tell the full story. But he had made a difference. And as dusk settled over the frostbitten plains, with the sky streaked by the last light of a Pacific winter, one could almost hear the quiet testament of engines that carried far more than soldiers and ammunition. They carried ingenuity, grief, courage, and the hidden hand of a man who refused to let protocol outweigh life. In the annals of war, some acts are recorded. Others live only in the hum of a well-tuned engine, the shadow of a mechanic's labor, and the silent knowledge that sometimes one human decision, driven by emotion and technical brilliance, can change the course of history.